understanding the principles of judging, things to do with how to assess arguments. And I think quite fairly right now, you should be able to understand how all these do work. I'm not going to be very specific about the format because I think this in general could apply to any specific format. So I'm just going to discuss in general what the adjudication process looks like, right? How you're able to build consensus, how you actively structure your feedback. And maybe if you're going to probably be a chair in certain rounds, how are you able to manage disagreements as a chair at the end of the day? So, and this is very important. I'll just give like a strategic differentiation between the two things that there exists, because oftentimes you're either going to judge a 3-on-3 debate format or essentially a 4-team format, which is like definitely British parliamentary. The difference could be a couple of things. Within WSDC, I think like generally for all formats, as judges, when debates get to end, then you're either leaving the call to go and deliberate, or you're probably asking the speakers to step out or something like that to come up with a decision. So oftentimes, regardless, in any other format, as judges, you always take a few minutes to review your notes and come up with like a decision on which team you're voting for. In BP, oftentimes it looks like an initial call because this can be swayed. Quite often in WSTC format, the role of chairs is definitely just to mediate a brief discussion, right? Where everyone should possibly should be kind of given a chance, like definitely to speak, while of course they highlight the points of arguments or disagreements. So probably this can be reflected back to what teams gave at the end of the day. Within BP, I think the chair is always asking, of course, like panelists to have their call, and then there are always the intermediary within like discussion. The only difference between the two is that in WSDC, it's always called a conferral system, where a judge has a unique ballot, despite the fact that a discussion does happen, because each judge fills their ballot individually and not through consensus. Within British parliamentary, the discussion is meant to arrive at a particular call. That means we can concede to an extent that a particular team X or Y should be winning the debate over the other. And that is facilitated through the discussion. So you could have judges that can dissent from the majority on either side. But when it comes to definitely WSTC, if you have a dissenting opinion, as a chair, you must factor in that discussion in regards to where you particularly thought that the dissenting opinion maybe mattered in the debate, or why probably the other team was losing that specific opinion. For BP, it's always just going to be a general discussion, because it's always, as a chair, you deliver oral adjudication specifically on the majoritarian opinion that came off that specific panel at the end of the day. Whereas in WSTC or the most 3-on-3 team formats, these things are largely factored in when you're having that specific chat, like in regards to decision making at the end of the day. So, conferral judging or panel consensus has just only one specific objective that you want to always kind of like reach a fair unified decision while still respecting diverse perspectives. So there are always going to be a couple of things that you have to do as a chair, or probably as all judges on that panel. I think the first thing here looks like you having an individual assessment first, where all judges independently assigning scores on probably things like manner, matter, or method, what you've been used to as structure, content, and definitely the style. And this always comes at highlighting the key issues before the discussion does happen. And I think this is very important, that you kind of avoid early biases by refraining from sharing initial opinions until all the judges in that panel have analyzed the debate. This seemingly has happened in some instances where you have maybe members on the panel discussing closely before even deliberations do happen. These discussions can be valid grounds that create a bias on who the judge gets to vote there in. So in most cases, as a judge, it's not so okay for you to have these specific discussions up until that point where you are required to state the teams that you are voting for and why definitely you are voting for those specific teams. So it's always very crucial um, for you as a judge to arrive at the preliminary verdict. We're looking at tracking the debate closely through, of course, your good notes, identifying the issues as maybe they emerge within the debate. And issues are often going to be questions that help you decide whether a particular motion should pass. And definitely teams in any of the formats will be attempting to to kind of like outline these issues themselves as the debate progresses. For example, if you're the motion that says this house would ban alcohol, right? The questions in the debate could be: is it legitimate? Is it kind of like a legitimate choice to drink alcohol? Does banning alcohol reduce the harms on drinkers and their families at the end of the day? So you're looking at through your notes to strategically evaluate who won the issues that you have identified. So you're actively comparing the contributions of these two teams on that given issue, the arguments and the rebuttal. And then you're checking exactly how they interacted with each other. So you're always going to decide which team ultimately won the particular issue based on the engagement to that idea, but also the analysis they give in regards to the same. So was there important material that stood at the end that was unresponded to by the other side? Did the existing responses adequately take down the core point of maybe the core point a team made to that specific argument? I probably thought that if you did like the session on assets and arguments, I think there's a detailed chart in there to kind of like help you weigh the extent to which, yeah. So to help you weigh the extent to which a team is able to explain or able to respond to an argument. Was it just mere casting doubt on an argument? Did it mitigate the impact of that argument? Did it take down the argument completely? Dependent. So response on a level can do definitely different things to an argument at the end of the day. Then you're most likely deciding the importance of each team on the issues. I think in so many debates, it is going to be possible that one team has clearly resolved all the three issues or all the issues in the debate in a way that is favorable to their side. However, in some kind of like some debates, there are particularly going to be some close comparisons where different teams have won different issues. And so as a judge, as you're planning to come to your preliminary verdict, you want to use the matrix that teams often provide. I think early in a session around a model judge, you got to realize that you don't have to insert yourself as a judge within the round. So that means that if teams have provided metrics on which you ought to judge the debate, then you shouldn't be looking at other exclusive metrics that you have to use to weigh that specific clash. You want to be very specific on those particular things. So if teams are provided in the debate the metrics that you have to use to decide which issues are more relevant than others, you want to do that. But in instances where these things are absent, right, so you don't have specific metrics, oftentimes you use implicit metrics, right? For example, the time spent, the extent of the strength of the argument in each issue, intrusive metrics that maybe probably an average person would like commonly use to assess the weight of that specific argument. And then ultimately you determine a winner. That is the team that wins a majority of the important issue in that round will definitely win the round. Please note that I don't think winners will not be determined by the aggregate of individual speaker scores, but they're going to be rather determined by the issues won. So definitely, the scores should reflect the quality of the debate and the speakers. I'll explain this well when we get down in there. That you don't credit people uniquely because they had a more stylistic presentation within their speeches, but you're asking yourself, did these guys, in fact, able to execute this argument to an extent? For example, did they end just claiming the argument? Did they end at impacting the argument? Did they prove the comparative? Were they able to mechanize? Because the extent of proving that argument then warranties how valuable that argument ought to be in terms of contribution at the end of the round where you attempt to score the speakers. So you don't just assign someone a 70 simply because you thought they were satirical in how they presented their ideas, but you're actually asking, was this argument able to have the mechanisms that warranted a claim? Did this particular argument execute the impact, i.e., the importance of why the arguments were true or were probably something that we probably needed to care about? Or were they able to prove why the impacts, i.e., the benefits that they got, were exclusive to their side of the debate? And as of such, it means that your speaker scoring should reflect the quality of the argument and not the style of maybe the argument or how much the time the speaker spent making that particular argument. So it's very truly possible that a speaker is okay, very audible and confident. Probably they are good at using humor, but they are able to execute the argument to the extent of an impact. So even if it might excite you to an extent and feel like, oh, this particular speaker is outstanding, you can't give them a high-end speaker score because their argument is unable to fulfill that specific band. Similarly, speakers don't just get the lowest score simply because you think they were entirely boring. If the argument executed, regardless of how boring it was it able to maybe emphasize the mechanisms, the impacts, and probably the comparative way up of this argument and the other? That argument is seemingly much better if probably it executes the comparative much better than the argument that is probably said much more in a kind of like confident manner, but then lacks the crucial logical linkages to explain why that same specific stuff is very important at the end of the day. So that just definitely means that there is no such a thing like low point wins or high point losses. Teams that are often going to win the debate will definitely have a high speaker score as opposed to those that definitely lose the debate. The second thing then that becomes important is how you're able to structure the discussion in terms of like feedback, either as a chair or if you're going to actively be on a panel. I think when you identify the clash points, you focus on where the teams disagree. For example, if we had a motion that says this house would ban Zeus, the clash could be on animal rights versus the conservation. So you want to evaluate the matter or the content presented. You're asking yourself, did teams use logical arguments? Were the rebuttals presented very effective? You're assessing the manner. Were the speakers clearly very persuasive and probably did the tones of like the tone match the gravity of the argument? Our kid have coached, and when they're going to start the speech, they'll go like, I'll start my speech in alpha, beta, and sigma. And that in itself could be a fluffy introduction. Does it impact the extent to which arguments are going to be proven? Or do they lose track in between there and unable to fulfill and necessarily logically concluding those specific arguments, you want to know which team structure speeches were very cohesive, right? Did they prioritize the key issues within the research? I don't know, but if there was a session on definitely assessing arguments, this also like factored in, right? At what point is material new matter, or probably a washed argument, or completely an extension of an existing argument? So all this might affect a team like in very close calls on where exactly you're going to throw your decision as a judge at the end of the day. So if you're looking at building consensus within these discussions, it's very, very critical for you to have a criteria hierarchy, right? What are you getting to prioritize first? Are we prioritizing? And I think for WSTC, it's always a priority on the content, then the structure, and then the manner most likely factors in last. So even if your style might be exclusively good, I think if the content within that specific material is not that good, that means you would lose to a team that has better content and structure, even if they have like bad structure and a bad style in itself. So oftentimes it is always going to be about impact weighing, right? You're looking at which team's arguments had a greater significance in terms of impact. In most cases, the other things like style or even structure can just like help you like break ties. So if you have like us, if like probably in a split, in most cases you might get to vote on these specific aspects, but also generally sometimes it's going to be up or raised to the chair to kind of like revisit the key clashes. For example, if like on a panel of 3 judges, or so, and you have judges A and B believing that maybe team government won on animal rights in terms of the the animal rights matter, and you have like Judge C favoring opposition's conservation rebuttals. So the chair probably is asking which arguments swayed the debate's trajectory. You can reach a consensus in the round that proposition lacked rebuttal engagement. And so in that instance, you're saying that opposition is winning the debate. I think it's just very important that as a chair, you look out for judges who are actively listening. People are probably citing specific speech examples. And so that might be crucial in terms of definitely understanding who is winning on what specific clash and why they are winning. So you're using this opportunity in terms of the discussion to clarify any questions that you may have about the debate. Clarifications about maybe the judging rubric itself. So yes, point X was made for the first time in the third speech. Are we allowed to credit it? Can team opposition raise a definitional challenge in their second speech? And the things can be important questions that you can use to resolve very close clashes between teams. Maybe it's about clarifications about subject elements of the debate. So maybe questions attempting to ascertain or clarify what happened. And maybe these specific items kind of like would be double checked with how you're tracking. So you're confirming that maybe the judge understood the point correctly. Proposition set up 3 levels to the principle, which was A, which was B, and which was C. Is that largely correct anyways? Does any of it kind of like respond? Maybe opposition does effectively respond to only the second level of the principle. That means maybe the principle could still stand regardless of that particular response. There could be like questions that are probably attempting to ascertain how to evaluate. And oftentimes like kind of like happens in very close debates. And so you are attempting to understand how to compare contribution or how to weigh up engagement. It could look like, well, the third speaker on opposition has responded in X manner. How can we kind of evaluate it if proposition has built implicit defenses in their case to deal with this kind of material or something like that? So I think holistically as a panel, it is important that you all um, kind of participate in identifying and tracking the issues on the panel. And this will always be done by the chairs, but also as wings, you can actively participate in the process, right? So you're given your opinion, which may most likely differ. So I don't think there's a binding rule that says you either have to split or you have to concede to the other team. You should come like from an informed perspective where you think that maybe you're changing your mind about the issue because of reason X, Y, and Z. So it's always a discussion of whether anyone's additions to the debate make you understand the debate much better, and maybe probably you could switch your mind based on that added contribution at the end of the day. And so after always this particular discussion, it's just always going to be about re-evaluating your decision making on maybe the new information and the perspective that you've received. So you want to take into account the discussion, you want to recheck your notes, and then make your final decision, and then probably informing the chair on whether you are probably changing your mind about a call or something like that. And that also is very, very crucial. I think the discussion most likely is done. And so definitely you want to prepare for oral adjudication. If it's going to be conferral system, both judges will fill in ballots independently, right? And of course, the scores will reflect how the discussions were. Whether you are in the minority or majority, you fill the ballot to reflect that decision. If you're going to be in British parliamentary, I think there will be no need. Only the chair will definitely do that. So, delivery and how to structure your speech as an adjudicator. I think the objective of oral adjudication and how to structure it is that it must deliver a clear and defensible decision that educates the speakers in that room about why particularly the panel made that specific decision. So there are a couple of things here that can happen while you structure your oral adjudication, right? I think I'll just like try to exemplify this. So your verdict statement could look like we unanimously award the debate to opposition on the strength of maybe their rebuttals to government's economic model, and that's why the debate goes to them. But in so doing, you must have some level of reasoning, like you attach some level, because you're not a transcriber in a round, and so your work definitely is to highlight where you thought the deadlocks were and how exactly the teams were able to resolve these specific deadlocks. You're saying, or probably you're highlighting one or two pivotal arguments or rebuttals. For example, opposition dismantled government's claim on job creation by citing X, Y, and Z. You're looking at maybe comparing the team structures. Um, government's third speaker dropped key points from their case. And so this is why probably we felt like this material for us was entirely like discarded while having the discussion within the round. Probably explaining why Team A's strongest argument outweighed Team B's argument. For example, government had emotional appeal, opposition presented logical consistency, and we think that is what decided the round for us. And you're looking at maybe feedback for improvement. Government whip should maybe have summarized the clashes instead of introducing new examples. We think like that would have been much better, or something like that. I think what's crucial here is that the phrases that you intend to use should look like a deliberate way on why you, the people on the panel, took that decision, right? the turning point in this debate was the critical failure came in when government maybe failed to do that. So you're emphasizing the decision logic as to why the judges most likely made the decision they made within that specific regard. So in most cases, this is just definitely important for you to be as comparative as possible. So I also just like don't think there is a need for you to make the teams wait. So you want to announce the decision first, with the possible exception, generally for rounds that maybe CAP says should be like silent rounds or something like that. And you also don't want to reveal the speaker scores, like within generally your oral adjudication, and you're probably walking the teams through the tracking of the debate and its specific interactions rather than giving them a list of what arguments they made. You're asking questions, or you're making questions of why are the specific issues important in the context of this particular debate. Are these issues equally important, or some of them were important than others, and why? Which teams won on specific issues and why they won those particular issues? So you want to be comparative. What points? Maybe it could be points of argumentation. It could be points of information maybe presented. Were they more persuasive on the winning side? The explanation of the strength and the weakness of probably these particular arguments or teams kind of has to still be comparative. This is why we specifically unable to weigh that particular argument. I don't know. I did record oral education. Probably I'll share with Barack, and we'll share it with you. It could just like illustrate a structured version of comparative adjudication, because you're looking at weighing exactly how the teams engage on that particular clash and why you think the other team was unable to probably respond sufficiently, even if the responses did come through. You want to be very specific. You don't want to stop at generic phrases like they provided more analysis, they were more persuasive. Instead, you're given specific points of reference and why you think that was largely observable. I think the argument was X. How they illustrated this was X, Y, and that's why we think that in itself was generally maybe persuasive or something like that. You want to try to spend an equal amount of time on both teams, balancing both their positive and constructive engagement to the other teams. And oftentimes, if you don't do that, uh, some teams will give you a low score uh, on the presumption that the judge was unfair or the judge was more swayed on the other team as opposed to our team. You also want to choose your language very carefully. You don't want to have offensive comments, or you don't want to make fun of speakers. You want to be respectful at all times. For example, that speech was shitty. The reason why you guys felt is because your second speaker said. So you want to refrain from making specific attacks on speakers. These things can be demotivating, most especially for WSTC anyways. But I probably think we could just like cut across, and you just want to be very, very accommodative with the choice of words that you are probably choosing. Also, I know you might have a different way in which you intend to explain stuff to the teams as why they lost, but you want to explain the decision, but you want to stick to what happened in the round. You can offer suggestions for improvement much later. This ought to be separate from you most likely giving reasons as to why you think the teams performed in the way they did. A lot of teams might necessarily mistake this and think those are the unique reasons that you used as to why they are probably losing the round anyways. So be very specific to use the content, the analysis the teams used, as opposed to objectively thinking of other particular things that you thought could be winning material for teams at the end of the day. The other thing I want to talk about then is things to do with like constructive feedback for teams generally, or probably speakers. I think your role as a judge is you are an educator and not just unbiased judge. That means if asked, you want to provide suggestions of how you would have approached the motion or specific arguments or responses that you might have run. Notice, I think this could be very useful, but it's always not going to be a necessity. Probably coaches, like in most cases, I just actively want you to do this anyways. And I think that that could be a good way for you to give feedback to these people. And oftentimes on your flow sheet, I think they'll discuss in a detailed session what or how you can flow, but you can specifically have those side notes for speakers, and this could like co-op you generally on giving feedback. You want to suggest to teams how to prioritize maybe their material. You want to provide in-depth feedback per speaker, what they did well, what they can do better in the next round. You want to adjust your feedback to the speakers. And so, like, if you know that you are dealing with novice speakers, you want to kind of like adjust your comments to a much more simpler tone than complex stuff. You're saying things like you didn't contextualize, you didn't frame, and it all sounds a bit elusive to them. So you want to know the nature of tournament you're in and who exactly you're providing feedback for. I think that can inform that your feedback is like very like more meaningful. Also, you don't like single out specific speakers for doing poorly, like I've said. I think that would be kind of like a bit discouraging for most of them. So generally, you want to be nice and maybe compliment them when you can. I think that could be a positive way. I'm definitely of helping them grow essentially. Generally, the last thing when we come back to the process of adjudication is something that looks at handling panel disagreements, because your objective in panels is not to have a longer discussion than necessary. You have an objective to resolve any conflicts while still having or arriving at um, a better way to disagree about maybe specific topics and all that. I think it's crucial, like in two ways, or like you could practically do it like in two ways. I think first, you can focus on an objective criteria, right? We just look at revisiting your adjudication rubric and asking yourself which team did better to address the motion core intention. You can also look at using a precedent, right? I don't know, but if you have access to the WSDC manual, you could just like revisit it. There are particular arguments that we could treat as dropped arguments. And so we treat oftentimes dropped arguments as conceded material, i.e., the teams do concede to drop this material. And so, as of such, we cannot credit that specific material. Uh, what is a dropped argument? So let's just imagine an argument is introduced in the first speech and then discarded in the second speech and then returned back in the third speech. Such an argument can be looked at as a dropped argument, or what we call late material, because they brought it up in their first speech, dropped it in the second, and then brought it back in the third. So even if it comes back, it may have insignificant impact on the round than any other argument. That is probably completely new material, which is like which probably they prepped or had in their prep time, but they did not discuss it in their first or second speeches. They didn't know flag it as an argument in the first, but brought it for the first time in the third argument. You want to like treat all this material as a whole as new argument. However, some arguments might be evolution arguments, right? Where they're not just new material, they existed in the first speeches, they were extended in second speeches and responded to by the other side, and then extended again in third speeches to respond to the other side. Such an argument is more important than any of the other two arguments that I've highlighted. So, in that level of priority, you want to have material that is much more evolutionary to maybe let material and then maybe to new material. And so that is how you could discard the importance and the relevance of the material within the round. So your role essentially, if you're chairing this panel, is to mediate on the discussions to ensure that everyone, whether minorities, are going to be heard. And then you could specifically propose compromises. For example, it's true that opposition had higher content, but then government was good on maybe the structure in itself. So probably doing a strategic way up on which of them has to be given a keen priority. So I also think a better way for you to deal with conflicts on panel could be you using de-escalating phrases. um, that could look like. So yes, I see your perspective, but let's weigh the impact of. So you look more of accommodative of the minority or divergent opinion, and you want to look inclusive and understand exactly what they're talking about, but then maybe you want to focus the discussion on something else anyways. It's more like, could we split the difference by awarding up on matter and government on manner? Probably yes. Government had good style, but I think opposition had good content. So yeah, it goes to where they both like have maybe particular impacts, but person A or team A had better structure. Maybe Op was just only good to the extent of maybe the style in itself, but the structure was largely failing, and so we're going to award the debate based on that, or something like that. An example of this could look like, so let's just imagine Judge A says that government's emotional appeal was very persuasive, like it's so unmatched. Judge B says opposition's rebuttals were more substantive. So, as a chair, you probably want to ask the judges to assess which factors impacted the audience's likelihood to kind of like vote. Was it emotional appeal or the substantive responses? So, always like within your discussion as a chair, you want to penalize judges who dismiss others' views or rely on personal biases. Maybe me, I just prefer the economics arguments, and that's why I'm voting for them. And so you think like that in itself is seemingly very uncomparative, and maybe perhaps that's why you want to push the judge specifically to have maybe a discussion on something that you think might be crucial for the discussion largely to exist. So I just think the process of adjudication just much more likely looks like what I've discussed, where you have initial calls, you have a discussion more about what has happened, and it's attempted at providing information on maybe what you would have missed entirely in the round, and exactly maybe how you resolve specific conflicts on a panel, and how exactly you're able to come up with maybe like how you would like structure your oral adjudication. So this might be it when it comes back to the process of adjudication. I think if you actively do practice this, it will seemingly make you a good judge, either, or probably as well make you a good panelist. So you can probably get a good score from your chair because the manner in which you engage within the discussion could be perceived as one that was professional, engaging, or something like that. So I don't think there's just much more to this. Uh, I would, I don't know how many people on the call, but I would just like do specific assignments, and then you guys can come up with a call. So there are 1, 2, 3. Okay, there are about 5 people on the call, 5, 6. So I think that would even make it much easier. But before I do give that, is there any specific question that you want to ask? Anyone has a question? Okay, yeah, sure, you can unmute.
All right, let me audible, Josh.
Yeah, yeah, you are.
Yeah, I kind of like normally have some issues, mostly in these tournaments where you find like Cup is not like specifically interactive with the judges, or maybe you find like a team, maybe of the judges you are cheering with or you're paneling with, are not very intrinsic in a way that they do not, okay, they're not well defined with what maybe the format can be. You know, it can be Cal Popper, it can be WSDF, BP, or what and what. But then you realize that people want to maybe focus much on like things that make up the warrant, like the statistics, to make a call, and realize that maybe this one is not actually a major particular kind of reason why we should rely on that, because statistics, it's not a proof itself like to be broader. So my question is, okay, am I wrong to maybe normally judge it wrong, like finding statistics as a very building block to depend on to judge like a tournament, sorry, like a win or a loss? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just like respond to that real quick. Uh, I don't know, but you put like reviews closely to like specific notes about argumentation. I think statistics are good, examples are good, but they're only good to the extent that they are used as illustration to that argument construction. For example, if I say that I'm going to support say for instance progressive taxation, the premise could be that we don't have enough job opportunities, and to that extent you think this is a crucial problem and this maybe helps you create that resource. The team could illustrate, say, for instance, how many people suffer from lacking jobs and why maybe this kind of like extends as a spill to a huge number of individuals that largely depend on these people for survival. Notice that that statistic in itself doesn't exclusively prove the impact or the harm of people lacking jobs. So, you telling me that people are poor and they don't have jobs and their kids depend on them in form of statistics doesn't make a lot of sense unless you're able to explain the strategic implication of those statistics. For example, if I say that um, farming contributes to 80% of the general national income, you want to imply that analysis by explaining this probably means that we can get probably 1 trillion US dollars, and this money can be used to revamp within structures. So it's true, the statistics can work to illustrate and make the argument look persuasive, but they should also be able to make implication of this material. For example, if just like set up a debate and kind of like describe maybe what a country looks like or what a context is without explaining the relevancy of that context to the debate, then also it just doesn't make so much sense because it's still equally hard for the judges to vote on why that matters, on why the arguments or the impacts that you make are context specific. So in some instances, we just like discard the analysis or the setup that you give if you're unable to explain the implication of that particular analysis. So I don't like think you're wrong to discard arguments simply because like to discard statistics. But if these statistics are used to illustrate an argument made, then you should equally credit that specific argument or like the statistics inherently because they illustrate the same. So maybe the team is mechanizing something, they illustrate with statistics and then explain the impact of that and why you have to care about that particular harm that is created. So I think it can go two way. It just depends on the extent to which the things have been proven. Okay. Any other question? All right. So I think there'll be no question. So I'm just gonna type a practice. I don't know. I am okay. So I'm just gonna type this in the chat. If you don't mind, you could do the assignment and then definitely get back. You could do this discussion before you drop off. I think I can see prop prep op prep on the call. So right, i.e. like a specific discussion, and I'll just like specifically listening to evaluate your consensus building process. And then after that, uh, I think you guys can record 3-minute verdicts. I'm just gonna focus on your structure and the clarity that probably you use while delivering the call. So just those two things. Let me see. So there is Jalusa, Herbert, there is Jerop, Shadrach, Shanice, and then what pressure? Uh, I don't know. Can you guys probably just like type your names in the chat if you don't mind? I could just like do that and assign you real quick. In this chart, let me just tag the chart. Yeah, that's rough. Thank you. So, okay, Jesse, how about Cherop, Shadrach, so rough, how about I have Cherop. Then there is the okay, there's Shadrach, there is Jelusa, and there is Shanice. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Okay, exactly 6 people. Oh, there's also Jesse. Uh, I'll send Jesse to panel A. Okay. So panel A, the chair will be rough on panel A. Just give me a couple of seconds.